My name is Angela Hayes, and yesterday I erased my family from my life. Today, they tried to erase me from my own home. The pounding started just after noon. Heavy, insistent, like a challenge echoing through the thin hallway walls of my apartment in Salinas Valley. I froze, heart thudding against my ribs. Then came the voice I hadn't heard since I walked out of their lives. My son is inside. Break down the door, my mother. Her tone wasn't worried. It was theatrical, calculated. Moments later, police boots thundered down the corridor. The knock that followed wasn't a request. It was a command. Ma'am, open the door or we'll be forced to enter. I took a slow breath, steadied my hands, and unlocked the deadbolt. The door swung open, and there I stood, calm, cold, holding a thick folder to my chest. Inside that folder were bank statements, property deeds, and transfer forms, every line bearing my name. The color drained from Mum's face. Dad's smirk died halfway. Even my brother, Kyle, who'd always strutted through life as if rules were for other people, stepped back. The officer's eyes flicked from the papers to me. You called in a break-in? He asked Mom. She's keeping my son's apartment, she stammered. He lives here. I cut her off. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This apartment is mine. Bought with my money, my credit, my work. Every cent of it. The officer flipped through the papers. Property deed, mortgage, utilities. All under your name, he confirmed. His gaze hardened as he turned back to my mother. Filing a false report can cost you up to $500, ma'am. This looks like a civil dispute, not a crime. For once, she had no words. The silence in that hallway was heavy. The kind of silence that follows a truth you can't spin. Dad muttered, "We were just trying to protect what's his." But his eyes didn't meet mine. Kyle's hands dug into his pockets. His jaw clenched. I stepped forward, closing the gap between us. "No forced entry today," I said softly, repeating the officer's line. "And no more control either." They turned to leave. Their plan shattered in the bright afternoon light, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't just about property. It was about power, and I had just taken mine back. They thought a lie could take my home. They had no idea what was coming next. Last night was supposed to be a simple celebration. Mom's birthday dinner at Hollister's Diner, a place where the smell of coffee and fried onions clung to everything, including the truth. The entire Hayes clan had shown up. Aunts, cousins, neighbors who knew our family too well. It was small-town tradition. Pretend everything's perfect until someone bleeds. I sat at the far end of the booth, forcing a polite smile while laughter and toast filled the air. Then, between sips of sweet tea and the clatter of plates, Mom decided to turn her birthday into my public trial. "Angela's just borrowing Kyle's apartment," she said loudly, making sure every nearby booth could hear. My fork froze midair. Across the table, a cousin let out a knowing snicker. Dad chuckled, without looking up from his plate. "So true," he added casually. "We all know whose name should really be on that deed." Kyle leaned back in his seat, arms spread, flashing the grin that had always gotten him out of trouble. "It's fine," he said smugly. "She's just holding it for me till I get my business running." A wave of heat crawled up my neck. I'd spent 7 years paying off their loans, fixing their debts, and covering their bills while they called it helping family. But now they were calling me a squatter, in front of strangers. Mom wasn't finished. "He's the one who'll own it someday," she added sweetly. "Angela's just keeping it warm." Laughter rippled down the table. Cold, cutting, and cruel. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice even. "That's not true," I said quietly. "The apartment is in my name." Dad's tone hardened. "Don't make a scene, Angela. That was their favorite trick. Silence me with shame." But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked around that table, at every relative who'd taken my help, my money, my time, and acted like it was owed to them. I stood, chair scraping sharply against the floor. "Enjoy the celebration," I said, pushing the words through clenched teeth. "It might be the last one you have with me at it." Mom waved her hand dismissively. Always dramatic. But as I walked out of that diner, the clinking glasses and laughter behind me sounded like the door closing on the life I used to tolerate outside, under the pale neon glow. I called a locksmith. The night air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. By midnight, the locks had been changed, and for the first time I felt safe. Not from strangers, but from my own blood. They humiliated me in front of everyone. But by the next morning, they'd learn who really held the keys to the house they tried to steal. Morning sunlight leaked through the blinds of my small apartment in Salinas Valley, streaking the walls with quiet defiance. The air still smelled like new paint and courage. I'd barely slept, replaying the scene at the diner in my head. Every cruel laugh, every dismissive glance. But now I was done remembering. Today I was proving. The knock came at 9 a.m. Sharp, impatient. I opened the door to find 2 police officers standing there, notepads ready. Behind them, my mother's voice carried down the hall, desperate and shrill. "She's got my son's things. She won't let him in. That's his apartment." One of the officers looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we received a report of an unlawful eviction." I could have cried. I could have screamed. But instead, I smiled. The kind of smile that only comes when you've prepared for war. "Then you'll want to see this," I said, stepping aside. On my dining table sat a thick folder, the kind that weighed more than paper should. Bank statements, lease agreements, mortgage contracts. Every document stamped, signed, and notarized in my name, Angela Hayes, the owner. The lead officer flipped through them carefully. The tension in the room thickened until his pen stopped moving. "Everything here checks out," he said flatly. "Miss Hayes, this apartment belongs to you." I watched as my mother's bravado cracked. "We were only protecting our son," she muttered, her voice trembling now. "Protecting him from what?" I asked, stepping closer. "From the truth? From accountability?" Dad's usual authority had vanished. His eyes darted between me and the officer, searching for control he no longer had. "You didn't have to involve the police," he said quietly. "They're the ones you called," I reminded him. The officer shut his notepad, his voice steady but stern. "Ma'am, filing a false report is a crime. No forced entry today. This is a civil matter. And from what I see, Miss Hayes is in the right." Mom's lips parted, but no words came. Kyle shifted behind them, his confidence reduced to silence. For years they'd used guilt to control me. But guilt doesn't hold up against evidence. As the officers left, the hallway felt larger, like I'd reclaimed space they'd stolen long ago. Mom's voice followed as they retreated, faint but bitter. "You'll regret this, Angela." I turned back toward my apartment, my hand on the doorknob. I already regretted staying quiet. That part's over. The door clicked shut, sealing in something powerful. Not revenge, but ownership. Their lies collapsed under the weight of my proof. But the next battle wouldn't be fought in court. It would start with a single phone call that changed everything. The hours after the police left felt strangely quiet. Too quiet for a war that had just begun. My phone sat on the kitchen table, screen dim, until it suddenly came alive like a siren. One call, then another, then 5 more. Mom's voice filled the first voicemail. Trembling, false, and theatrical. "Angela, how could you do this? We're your family. You've humiliated us in front of the entire town." The second was Kyle, his tone drenched in venom. "You think you're smart, changing the locks? I'll take what's mine. You'll see." Then Aunt Maria, always the family enforcer. "You're tearing this family apart over a piece of property. Your uncle says our lawyer will handle it. I listened to every word in silence, not because I cared, but because each voicemail was proof of how desperate they'd become. Every threat, every guilt trip, every plea, a sign they were losing their power over me. The sixth call wasn't like the others. A knock came with it, gentle, uncertain. It was Stephen, my neighbor from across the hall, holding a warm dish of cornbread. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "Heard about the police earlier," he said softly. "You doing okay?" His kindness hit harder than their cruelty. "Just family drama," I said with a faint smile. Stephen nodded knowingly. In small towns like Salinas Valley, news travels faster than truth. "People at the market are talking," he said. "But no one believes your mom's story. Folks here know who's really been paying the bills." I thanked him, the cornbread's warmth grounding me more than I'd admit. When he left, I sat alone in the fading light, listening to the echo of their voices in my head. The lies, the manipulation, the constant pull back into their chaos. Not this time. I grabbed my keys and folder of documents, my armor, and drove to the First National Bank of Salinas Valley. Inside, the air was cool and still, the kind of calm that follows storms. "I want this property secured under my name," I told the clerk. "No shared access, no secondary claimants." The woman behind the desk adjusted her glasses, scanned the documents, and nodded. "Everything looks clear, Miss Hayes. We'll finalize the transfer today." That single confirmation, that my name alone held legal control, felt like the first breath of real freedom. As I walked back to my car, the late sun burned orange across the fields. For the first time, I didn't feel small under it. But just when I thought the fight was over, they showed up again. Not with words this time, but with a plea that hid a trap. 2 days passed before I saw their car again. The old silver sedan pulled up outside my apartment, tires crunching against the gravel like it was chewing on the past. Through the window, I saw Mom step out first, clutching her scarf like armor, with Dad close behind, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the ground. When the doorbell rang, I already knew it wasn't an apology. I opened the door halfway, blocking the frame with my arm. "Angela," Mom began softly. "We just want to talk." Her voice had changed, no longer commanding, but pleading. "Kyle's business is collapsing," she said, eyes glistening. "He needs the apartment as collateral for a loan, just until he gets back on his feet." Collateral. That word hit like a slap. "You mean my apartment?" I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "The one I bought at 22 with my savings while I worked double shifts. The one I used to pay off your debts and keep your farm from foreclosure." Mom's fingers twisted around the scarf, the fabric stretching with guilt. Dad stayed silent, his posture straight, but his eyes restless, searching for control he no longer had. "Please, Angela," Mom whispered. "You're doing well now. Kyle just needs one chance. He's our last hope." I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the script never changed. "Your last hope cost me years of my life," I said. "I worked weekends at the hardware store, nights at the diner, and still came home to help you. I'm done being the solution to your mistakes." Dad finally spoke. "You're being selfish." That word, selfish, had been their favorite weapon for years. The way they twisted my boundaries into betrayal. But this time, it didn't pierce. I met his stare, unflinching. "I gave up my 20s for this family. You call that selfish? Then maybe I should have started sooner." Mom's lip trembled. She stepped forward as if reaching for me, but I stayed still. "You can hate me for this," I said, "but you'll never guilt me again." I closed the door slowly, not slamming it, just letting the final click of the lock settle like a sentence. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Outside, the wind swept through the fields, carrying away their muffled voices until all I could hear was peace. For the first time, I didn't feel like a daughter. I felt like my own person. Unowned, unbroken, and finally free. But freedom has a price. And by the end of that week, the entire town would turn against me after one post from my brother went viral. By midweek, I thought the storm had passed. I'd sealed the deed, cut the calls, and reclaimed my peace. But peace doesn't last long in Salinas Valley. Not when gossip is its own currency. It started with a single notification. Kyle Hayes has made a post. His words were vague, but venomous. Family snakes will bite when they can't leech anymore. Some people will steal your dreams and call it justice. The post spread through the valley faster than wildfire on dry grass. His friends flooded the comments, painting him as the victim. Stay strong, bro. You'll rise again. She'll regret this. By noon, whispers followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, a cashier muttered, "That Hayes girl. Heard she kicked her family out." At the post office, someone said, "She's heartless. After all they did for her." I didn't defend myself. I'd learned long ago, truth doesn't scream, it outlasts. At home, I sat at my kitchen table, the blinds half closed against the nosy world. My laptop pinged with an email from the bank. Subject line, deed transfer confirmation, my name, my property, my peace, legally sealed. I stared at that message for a long moment. Relief spread through me. Not joy, just a steady calm. They could twist stories all they wanted. But this document was fact, and facts don't bend to family myths. Still, Kyle's post lingered in my mind. He wasn't just angry. He was rewriting history, painting me as the betrayer in the story where I'd been the lifeline. That's what manipulators do. When they lose control, they trade truth for sympathy. So I did what they never expected. I prepared. I pulled out a folder, edges worn and familiar. Inside were years of receipts, mortgage payments, bank transfers, every dollar I'd ever spent saving their collapsing farm and funding Kyle's business ventures. Each page was a weapon forged from endurance. If they wanted a war of stories, I'd bring evidence. I scanned the documents, uploading them to a secure drive. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't scared of losing anything, because I'd already lost them. When I looked out the window, the valley stretched quiet and gold in the evening light. For the first time, I felt no anger toward them, just a strange, hollow clarity. They'd chosen their story. I was choosing mine. The next morning, the bank's letter arrived in the mail, a physical deed with my name embossed in blue ink. I pinned it to my fridge like a victory banner. Let them talk. Let them spin. I had the truth, and the truth doesn't beg to be believed. But one last confrontation waited, their final attempt to take back what I'd built. And this time, it wouldn't be about property. It would be about power. The sky over Salinas Valley had that dull grey stillness that always comes before a storm. I drove through the familiar dirt road leading to my parents' house. The same road I'd driven countless times before, usually to help, fix, or rescue. But this time, I wasn't coming to save anyone. I was coming to end something. Mom had called 2 nights ago, her voice thin and controlled. "We just want to talk, Angela. One last time. Please." Part of me wanted to hang up, but part of me wanted closure. To look them in the eye and make sure they understood that the daughter they'd used like an ATM was gone for good. Their dining room was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe it was just the weight of guilt hanging in the air that made it shrink. The same wooden table, where I'd signed my first loan for their farm, stood between us, worn and stained with years of quiet betrayal. Dad sat at the head, shoulders squared, but eyes weary. Mom's hands trembled as she poured coffee she wouldn't drink. Kyle was already there, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, his phone face down beside him like a gun waiting to be drawn. "Angela," Mom began, "we didn't mean for things to get this far, but Kyle's business can't recover without your help. That apartment could." I cut her off. "The apartment is mine. It's done. You can't change that." Kyle slammed his hand on the table. You stole from us. You only have that place because I let you stay there in the first place. I didn't even blink. You mean the apartment I bought? The one I paid for with 7 years of overtime while you played businessman with my savings. His jaw tightened. You're just jealous. That word again. Always the same script. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. The same one that had saved me from the police visit, from their lies. The papers fanned out like evidence in a courtroom. Every dollar, every transfer, every payment, it's all here. I said quietly, this is the record of everything I sacrificed, while you told people I was selfish. Mum's tears came then. Not the manipulative kind this time, but the hollow kind. The kind that realizes the game is finally over. Dad's voice broke the silence. We can't lose everything, Angela. I looked at him and smiled sadly. You already did. The moment you tried to take what I built, I stood up, leaving the folder behind. A monument to everything I'd survived. As I walked out, the screen door creaked behind me, and for once, no one followed. Outside, the air was still heavy with rain, but I didn't care. The storm wasn't mine anymore. They'd taken my money, my trust, and my peace, but not my future. I didn't just win back an apartment. I reclaimed the part of me they could never buy again, my freedom.